This is the same Alabama team who needed a prayer in Jordan Hare to beat an Auburn team that lost to New Mexico State. So that's really what has me bothered right now.
Rece, can you deliver the strength of record, strength of schedule thing? Because you're making it sound as if Alabama played nobody.
Go
ahead.
Yes, you are, because they're in the top 5 in strength of schedule.
Yes.
Florida State's 55th. I totally get what you're saying. It's absolutely heartbreaking and devastating for them. The ACC has a winning record against the SEC this year, 6-4. 2 non-conference games for Florida State this year against the SEC, and they won both of them. I get it, but they're a different team, and this has been your point, Joey.
Yes, that has been my point. And so I feel awful for Florida State and Jordan Travis, because if he was still playing, this would be a different conversation. Everything you speak of was accomplished with Jordan Travis as their quarterback.
They won the last 2 games without him, though.
Yes, and that's when we saw this team with Tate Rodemaker
and Brock
Glenn.
Yes.
55 yards passing last night, it wasn't pretty. Here's the thing, Boog, and honestly, I hear everything you're saying. If our goal is to have the 4 best teams, there's nothing to do with what you deserve. There's nowhere in the bylaws that say you have to be undefeated. There's nowhere in the bylaws that say if you're in a Power 5 conference, you're the champion undefeated, you get in. I feel terrible, but when we look at this Florida State team and what they are today, what they were last night, what Alabama, who lost to Texas, who was the 3rd team in this thing, what they were then and what they are now. This Alabama team is different, and you know this. And this Florida State team is different, and you know this. They lost their quarterback. It's not a receiver. If Worthy doesn't play for Texas, they're still a really good football team. When you lose your quarterback, that is different than any other position in any other sport on earth. Your quarterback's the most important.
You just got to win a different way.
Let's get Kirk in quickly. Kirk, when you've heard these discussions and these arguments, there's a lot on Florida State's side, from winning against the SEC to the ACC success against the SEC. Is this simply a case where, had Jordan Travis not been hurt, or, to be fair, let's say Tate Rodemaker had really put up some numbers offensively in the Florida game, so you had a little more data to support that Florida State would be competitive, that this would be a no-brainer decision and the Seminoles would be in. And this all centers around the established criteria by the committee that they evaluate injuries.
Well, you'd have to ask Boo that when he hops on here in a couple minutes. But I think all of us... Yeah. I think if Tate went out and lit it up, it'd be a lot like what Cardale Jones did for Ohio State. I think the committee evaluated based on what they saw. And by the way, what Florida State did at the Swamp was impressive. I called that game. That was a tough environment. I don't care what Florida's record was. That game was impressive for them to be able to get out of that game with a backup quarterback. But when you're looking at what they did the last 2 games and you're evaluating, they went all the way down to the 3rd guy, a freshman. This is nothing against Mike Norvell. I think we all are proud and so happy to see that Florida State brand back from where it was 3, 4, 5 years ago to where it is now. It has sustainability, and it's going to be around with Mike, and they're going to do a great job. To me, if you took J.J. McCarthy off of Michigan, we'd be saying the same thing right now about Michigan. If you took Michael Penix off of Washington the last 2 games, and they were struggling with a backup quarterback, we wouldn't be looking at the totality of Washington's season. We'd be looking at the last 2 games. You have to look at the last couple games without the heart and soul. This guy is the face of this resurgence of Florida State, Jordan Travis, and to take him out is just as big as any player in the country that you would take off that roster. So to me, it's a reflection of what he meant to that team specifically. And these last 2 weeks, giving Tate and giving Brock the backup, the 3rd string guy, an opportunity. And it's just a reality. You're comparing them, Alabama to Florida State. You got to give Alabama the nod, even though they had a close game against Auburn in a rivalry game. They beat Georgia on a neutral site, and Georgia was the team, and Alabama just beat them. You cannot take Alabama out of this. They have to be in, and I think the committee did a great job. I tip my cap as well.
It'll be interesting to hear when we talk to Boo Corrigan if that was the biggest thing, and if prior to that, you wouldn't want one game to change this. But I haven't been able to get Boo for a couple of weeks to answer whether any team was deemed unequivocally better than the others, which is also listed in the protocols in the process, and whether they, up to yesterday's point, viewed Georgia in that realm and therefore gave Alabama the nod. Here are the resumes. By virtue of being undefeated, that's going to give Florida State an edge in strength of record, so they're one spot ahead. Alabama has the edge in strength of schedule rank. They have the edge in wins-loss records against the top 25 in terms of number of wins. And the key wins are pretty close, with the one that's the biggest, certainly the win against Georgia for the Tide yesterday.
Yeah, and that was, I think, ultimately what put them over the edge. The way that they won, as much as anything else, controlling the line of scrimmage, dominant in the run game at times. Defending the pass, Georgia came in as one of the best passing teams in America, and the lockdown coverage on those wide receivers, including Brock Bowers, was remarkable. I'm still amazed by the decision that was made in looking at all of this. Alabama, there is no question in my mind they're one of the 4 best teams. I feel terrible for Florida State. But back to the original point, I wonder how much the decision had to do with Alabama's affiliation with the SEC and the SEC's performance at the top of college football when given the opportunity over the course of the last 10 years in the playoff and the 15 years before that, well, it was the BCS. I wonder the SEC how much that factored in, because it's tough. It's really tough to consider crowning a national champion without an SEC team being involved in the top 4. It's really hard to imagine that, just given how that league is played in championship settings over the last 2 decades.
And if you're looking at that point, then to me, you're projecting, you're trying to get the best matchup based on performance, not getting the teams that deserve to be in my opinion. And I think we look at this from a selfish standpoint. We want the best matchup so we can say, you know what, this year's semifinals wasn't a blowout. It wasn't a blowout like it's been the last couple of years, that we get good matchups. And I just think that's devastating for the kids at Florida State. And I think we're diminishing how you win. It's okay to win with defense. It's okay to have a dominant defense and win a football game. It doesn't always have to be scoring 50 or 60 points. And I think as a football nation, as a group of analysts, we got to wrap our mind around that, because to me, this is about, let's get the 4 best matchups. We can sell it and we can do all these different things. Who cares if Florida State won 16-6 with defense? They dominated a Louisville team from a defensive standpoint. Who cares?
I don't either. I mean, but I will say this. I think they seem like separate arguments to me, Boog. You can win with defense. You can be a defensive-minded team and win, but it's a different argument as to whether they're still the same team that put together this resume that you say merited them being in the playoff, which is a reasonable position to take. I'm just saying it seems like 2 different arguments that you're conflating a little
No
bit.
team is the same. From the beginning of the season to the end, no team is the same. So to your point, I agree with you. They're not the same team, but that's okay. You can be a different team. I've been on teams that lost 2 or 3 games at the beginning of the season and went on to win the Super Bowl. You can adjust and you can change. That's what good coaching is about. Jalen Milroe is not the same player now that he was at the beginning. Tommy Rees changed the game plan. Nick Saban coached him up better, and now he's playing at an elite level. He changed. It's okay to change.
I hear that they changed, but that's different. You're talking improvement. We're talking missing major factor, which I know we're going around in circles. Joey, I want to give you a real quick last word here.
A couple things just happened there that I hate to hear.
Give me something.